we're talking about saving lives, we're talking about saving money, we're talking about saving our environment. And sometimes we have to rely on our interpretation, because the mistakes or failure we will have as a consequence of not following that interpretation could be even more disastrous.
Hello, my name is Andrew Geary, and welcome to Seismic Sound Off, in-depth conversations in applied geophysics. In this episode, I speak with Alireza Malehmir, professor of applied geophysics at Uppsala University. We discuss geophysics' role in preventing natural hazards and best practices for communicating science to the public and policymakers. Dr. Malehmir also led a Geoscientists Without Borders project focused on quick clay or rapid earth flow landslides in Sweden. Find a link to his project in the show notes. Now, for our conversation.
You know, for a long time, I had interchangeably used the words natural disaster and natural hazards. Could you just briefly explain the difference between a natural hazard and a natural disaster?
Yeah, I guess you could say a natural hazard is some sort of like a threat that can occur naturally, like if it's a volcano, if it's an earthquake, landslide, flooding. So as long as it is a threat that has not occurred, it is a hazard. But when it occurs, and particularly if it impacts us, like our lives or infrastructure or environment, then it's a disaster. Being a natural hazard by itself is not dangerous in a way, but when it occurs and it impacts us, then it's a disaster. So understanding about natural hazard is pretty good, because we could avoid turning that to a disaster.
What recommendations would you have to get the geoscience community to better engage with other countries that are impacted by natural hazards to minimize the impact of it striking if and when something comes along?
We have very good expertise. You know, we are equipped with lots of modern technologies, sometimes not adapted to specific field. If you know what I mean, like we're very good in exploring. We explore to very great level of details. For whatever reason, we are not employing them to solve our natural hazards, essentially, or tackle our natural hazards, like understanding them. So one way to contribute would be like we try to test some of these advanced technologies, advanced methods that we have. And we say, okay, let's do a test. Like essentially this is what we did in our project. It was not really meant to solve the trouble. It meant to use the whole thing as a model. And I guess that's maybe the way we could go. And then I think the scientific community should contribute more and more. They have the knowledge, but they should just come and say, okay, let's test this for this particular problem and see whether we can adopt that to this particular problem. And I guess we will be then successful. You know, as I said, we're very good at exploring at depth in very great level of details. But whether this is money-driven or interest-driven, it remains to be a little bit fixed.
Taking a slight step back, you know, just for my own sake, you know, what type of natural hazards or what type of these problems do you see geophysics as being very adept at addressing?
Earthquakes, I guess. I think earthquake I don't know if you know, most earthquakes that we have, which they turn to become disaster, they're located areas that are highly populated. And for that reason, or because we have the methodology, we use to a very great level of details geophysical methods, particularly seismic methods. And for volcanoes, yes, because we also monitoring them, but we know where they occur. It's often where we have existing volcanoes. But we do not use them very often for landslides, you know, flooding and sinkholes.
The American Geophysical Union has a position statement on natural hazards. And one of the things they say is they have these 6 areas that they think we need to build to have a resilient society. And those areas are research, education, awareness, strategy, investment, and preparedness and response. I was wondering, what area of those 6 do you think something like the Society of Exploration Geophysicists are strongest at addressing now, and what area might need to be improved to minimize the cost of natural hazards?
Yeah, I guess if I want to point my hand in one of those six topics, I would say the strongest of those six is awareness. And I have a reason for it. We are aware of the natural hazards. We know where they occur. We know the trouble that they can make, but we often ignore them. So we often ignore them, and or maybe sometimes ignore them. And because we ignore them, we don't quickly respond to them, and we're not ready when they occur. And so I would say awareness, it's there, but the problem is the ignorance. So. And we often do not invest to study them. So because, if something is hot today, a disaster occurs, temporarily this is on the agenda, but after a while we start forgetting it. So we do not invest. We do not invest to understand the trouble in a great level of details. It's often maybe superficial. And then, of course, as a geophysicist, we are armed with all these arsenals of methods and technology, and we could provide this great level of details. We can scan the subsurface without digging it. So, and that's the key thing. And also, we do not educate ourselves. So, in a way, when I say ourselves, it's us as an individual, as a society, students, and those students are not necessarily geophysicists. The students taking our courses, but we try to bring up the topic and we educate our society and even our government, then I guess we would do a much better job. And we have the technology, so but we have to adopt them for our problems. It might not be straightforward. And I guess at the end, what we need to improve, it's likely, is to have a good strategy that combines research and education to tackle natural hazards. And then I guess we should also say natural hazards sometimes are unavoidable. So it's like if you're sitting in a volcanic rich area, you're expecting to get volcanoes erupting. If you're living in tectonic zones, you're expected to get earthquakes. But understanding the conditions, the consequences that they bring, will lead us to better prepare ourselves, and there we can maybe save lives, money, and even our natural resources. We have consumed quite a bit to build our infrastructure. So as soon as they are destroyed or they're not properly built, we are ruining our natural resources.
How can the geoscientists and the professional societies they are a part of do a better job of addressing maybe some of that ignorance or that educational needs and get this information in the hands of policymakers and local governments and people that can really address some of these things that you all are finding out in the field?
I think we as a geophysicists are also guilty, or I think maybe geoscientific community as a whole. We geophysicists are guilty of not presenting or methods or approaches to the other, how to say, like sister fields, like geoengineers, for example. But as a geoscientific community, we are guilty of not presenting our approaches or methods to the society. We do not write very often popular science. We do not write things in newspaper. This is the way we do it, and you could, we could explore, but we could explore for natural resources, but we could also scan our subsurface, from lower feet down to whatever hundreds of meters. And that's where the main trouble is in most cases. And again, we are very bad at representing ourselves to the society. And that's, I guess, something we should exercise. How do we go out and tell the other communities, those that are making decisions? We're even sometimes shy to say what we think about the subsurface, because we maybe think it's totally wrong and it's not, it's unexpected. But again, going out and talking to the public, talking to the government is important. And we could maybe start right there from ourselves, talking to each other. Geophysicists should talk to engineers, geoengineers, and participate in their conferences, their magazine, their journal peer reviews, and then taking it from there to higher up. And I guess as far as we have not solved from this bottom, it's very difficult to go very higher up, because first we need to fix this among ourselves.
You sort of talked about this in a couple questions ago, but I'm wondering if you could elaborate maybe a little bit more about what roles you see, with other disciplines that they could take, and policymakers and these key stakeholders have in mitigating natural hazards, how they could all work together to improve the future.
I think if we want to improve, we need to build up teams that includes a wide range of expertise. There should be geophysicists, there should be geoengineers, hydrogeologists, obvious community there that are really going to be impacted, and they all need to work together. And I guess when they work together, this is going to impact. So, because they're going to complement each other, they have to argue about their findings, whether they are significant, if they're not significant, how you can argue that they are not significant. And very often, everything we see in the subsurface has some role. But again, it's like, how significant is that role? It's something left for the team to discover. And I guess if they work as a team and they involve policymakers, then they would see it's a team that are arguing for one trouble. They're arguing that if these are the conditions, it may lead to disaster. So, and policymakers will see that this is based on scientific facts, and there's a common argument about it, and I guess it's going to be both by them. So, and again, I think working in a team, it's very helpful. And I guess most geoscientists Without Borders program, it's the project that we have, the multidisciplinary, they involve maybe a community, they involve different fields. But if we involve even policymakers, it would really lead to some impact.
There can be, especially in the United States, and you would have a better understanding of this as a more global problem as well. Sometimes science can come under attack, and just the idea of what is scientifically proven or a solid scientific theory can be difficult for scientists to elaborate and explain to policymakers. Do you have suggestions about how geoscientists and the work that you're doing can be explained in ways to policymakers that they can understand why this is scientifically relevant and why it's something that they should pursue?
We're talking about two things. As a geophysicist, what you see is an indirect image. So what often leads to trouble there, being questioned or being attacked, is the interpretation that we have on those, let's say, images. So the factual things are not wrong. So, if we see something, if we're pretty, if we have not done anything wrong in our processes, they're real. But the way we interpret them, it's where we get into trouble. So, and any interpretation, it's subject to failure, because it's an interpretation. Eventually, it's not a direct observation. So, I guess tackling geohazard, it's much easier, because you could back up your interpretation with some direct observation. For example, like boreholes. In some particular cases, it can happen. But in some other cases, may not that be easy. If you're studying an earthquake, it might not be easy. But I'm aware of even boreholes monitoring earthquakes. So anyway, so for our interpretation, if we want to be very solid, we need to back it up with direct observations. And again, those direct observations are point-wise. So we're going to be attacked because we're going to interpret. Even sometimes we're 100% sure. We call it at the end, it's interpretation. And it's really as a mindset. It's a mindset that we need to change, that we're talking about saving lives, we're talking about saving money, we're talking about saving our environment. And sometimes we have to rely on our interpretation. And that interpretation alone it's enough. So, and it does not have to be 100% correct. because the mistakes or failure we will have as a consequence of not following that interpretation could be even more disastrous.
How can the SEG and even the private sector better contribute to the world more broadly in mitigating these natural hazards?
I think with expert communities like SEG, what we are armed with is the technology. And what the public is armed with is essentially it's what they see from aftermath of a natural disaster. I don't want to say like to abuse this, but essentially if technology is shown to the public that is going to work and it's going to provide some sort of reliable information, I guess public will back up that technology. So again, for us as a SEG or as an expert community, we need to connect to the public. We need to connect to society. And we need to kind of lower our language in, expert language and try to go in a gentle, I don't know how to say it, like in really popular science way. Say, okay, the method is there, the technology is there, we have had it for some times, and you showcase this. You take your examples from GWB, for example, and go out to say, this is how we have done it and how it has worked in other places. Why shouldn't it work here and there?
At seg.org/podcast, you will find the show notes and links to some of Alireza's articles, as well as the American Geophysical Union's statement on natural hazards. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews bring a smile to our faces. Subscribe to Seismic Sound Off on your phone using the podcast app of your choice. This will allow you to receive the latest episodes first. My podcast app of choice is Pocket Casts. Seismic Sound Off is sponsored by the SEG Wiki, the place to find hundreds of biographies of geoscientists, open access tutorials, and ongoing translations of SEG's best-selling book, Robert Charris Encyclopedic Dictionary. Type wiki.seg.org into your browser to visit the world's first online geophysics encyclopedia. Original music by Zach Bridges. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by me, Andrew Geary. Special thanks to the SEG podcast team, Jennifer Crockett, Ali McGinnis, Mick Swiney, and Adrienne White. Thank you for listening. This is Seismic Sound Off, signaling off.